The Summer Birds by Penelope Farmer, Part 2, 10. Soon after this, the rest of the school came drifting back to the village from their holidays. But Charlotte was still dazed by joy and lived through the discussions, the meetings, and the plannings that took place about the battle in a dream. Only the night before did she wake up to the fact that the battle was serious, that if the boy's side did not win, he would leave the very next day. They might know the secret of his coming, but that would not make up for the fact of his going. So she lay awake half the night in sick anticipation, watching the moon uncaring outside the window and reliving the whole summer in her mind. Every now and then she imagined the next day vividly. She imagined the triumph if they won, heard the voices of each of them and the things they would say. Then she imagined failure, how unbearable, how terrible that would be. She could hear the boy saying goodbye, the children's answers. The pain bit into her. She ached with it, even wept into her pillow until it was damp, in the misery of the possibility. Then she told herself she was being silly and fell asleep at last, to dream yet more vividly of the next day, the boy like an eagle, clawed and beaked, terrible in the sky, and her own tears dropping huge and hot down to buried downland earth, where they turned into whole nestfuls of baby gulls with staring scarlet eyes. She woke suddenly, thinking it must be very late, for it was so in her dream. But there was no noise in the house. The sun fell weakly through the window. It was the early morning sunlight of a perfect September day, and it meant that she had a long time to lie awake. The sick feeling came back to her stomach. She almost woke Emma, leaning over to prod the blanketed hump that was her sister before deciding that she could not explain even to Emma quite what this fight could mean to her. So she lay, eyes wide, staring at the ceiling, and tried unsuccessfully to forget about it. The children had argued in a long meeting the day before how everything was to be arranged. They had decided on French and English as the basis for their battle rules, since they all knew it, and it would not have to be explained many times over to the stupidest among them, such as Molly Scobb and Baby Fumpkins. But it was to be played, obviously, flying. The place they chose for fighting was more like a battlefield than a playground. About 2 miles from the village lay a dip in the downs, quite high up. Apart from a dew pond, right in the center at its lowest point, the ground was bare, but on either side of the dip small, rather scraggly beech woods clung to the slopes. These woods were to be the opposing camps. From their trees would dangle the flags, 7 for each side, which the girls had made from handkerchiefs, with crested badges sewn on them, an eagle on red for the boys' side, an owl on blue for Toddy's. That had been Emma's idea, to make the battle more real. To lose all the flags would be to lose the battle. Any of the children might try to steal the enemy flags, but any of them caught on the enemy side of the dew pond would be prisoners until they were rescued by a fellow knight, for they were to be called knights. They decided eagerly, except for Jammy and Scooter, who could only be squires because they were so small. All of them, especially Charlotte, who had read many books, wanted to make it as much like a battle in olden days as possible. So they decided that, as well as the flags, they would have supply trains, the baggage to consist of sweets, and everyone agreed to give up their weekly allowance to buy it. Each side's supply would be placed in a tree like the flags. To lose would be to lose greatly, half their crested pennants and half their prisoners. They had become so excited about the plans that they nearly forgot they were supposed to be deadly enemies. Indeed, throughout the meetings and arguments, they were very friendly. Disagreement over details arose just as much between members of the same side as between members of the different sides. And the feeling of rancor that had been in the air before the holidays seemed to have died out, which was strange. Now they were preparing for the battle it had caused. Yet there was no thought in any mind that they should abandon the battle, and it was lucky that they could be quite friendly in deciding the rules and the place for the fighting. They gathered by the dew pond at the center of the hollow on a morning as glowing and unconcerned as any other summer day. But they were more silent and shy as they had been when first they flew, though now they were practiced flyers, clever as footballers at darting and turning and fainting. They all had a sick feeling in their stomachs, a school examination feeling. "Perhaps we'd better start," said Toddy briskly, and with a catch in his voice that was nervousness, not tears. "Should we toss for sides?" he asked, turning to the boy, but none of them had any pennies, so they had to use lengths of grass, thin and flat, which Charlotte held carefully in her closed hand. Toddy won and chose his champ. There was little difference between the two woods, but his winning seemed an omen, and the boy's side was gloomy. They ranged themselves in a line and waited. It seemed endless, the time of silent waiting, but suddenly they had begun almost without realizing it, and in the rushings of air and the shoutings and the handkerchief wavings, it seemed impossible that silence and waiting could ever have existed. And that is the end of chapter 10.